One of the things I find hardest about getting old is not the high blood pressure or the sore backs or the fading memory, but it's just this sense that as you get older, it's harder to find access to like what's going on in your culture, especially if you're really busy with your jobs and your kids and stuff like that. It feels like you just start to feel like there's whole cultural movements going on that you don't have access to. And I'm trying really hard as a guy pushing 60 here to sort of tune into to Zoomers and Gen Alpha and trying to see things from their perspective and learn a little bit more about their culture from their music to political ideology. And so today we're going to talk to an admirable, whip-smart young woman by the name of Kim Hunt, who is, now get ready for it, Gen Xers and Boomers, an online influencer, which is a term that mystifies some of us dinosaurs, as in, what does an influencer actually do to be an influence? Well, today we're going to find out. I will tell you that Kim has hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers at her handle, Slay the GOP. So her sphere of influence is very real. As her handle suggests, Kim operates in the realm of political influencing. Um, there's a culture war going on, and Kim is definitely on the front lines, wielding critical thinking, logic, humanism, and yes, a healthy dose of sarcasm at times. What separates Kim, to me, from many political pundits is her background and upbringing, which speaks directly to her character. We're going to talk a lot about where she came from and why she fights for the little guy. So please welcome this week's Fresh Face in Hell, Kim Hunt. Kim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so in doing my research and listening to some interviews and having grown up on the ass end of capitalism myself, and written one of the most scathing and frequently banned class narratives in American history in Lawn Boy, I'm struck by your background, and I'm just totally inspired by your grit and resilience in the face of, geez, just a ton of adversity. So I'm hoping you'll walk us through your childhood to the present moment. I know there's a lot of background here, but it just says so much about your character. I know and I think your motivations too. So, I mean, are you willing to start at the top? The story I heard you tell started when you were 4 years old, and it was harrowing.
Yeah, so essentially my biological mom and my dad were never married. And my dad struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction. And I think that drove my mom to just abandon me and my brother when I was about 4 years old. So she just took off to somewhere in California, and I never heard or saw her ever again. My dad managed to keep us within the same 1-mile radius my entire life. So I never was disrupted in terms of, like, having to transfer schools or anything like that, fortunately, but, he lost custody of me when I was 12 years old. He missed my 11th birthday. At that point, he had lost custody of me, and he had scheduled, like, court mandated visits where there needed to be someone supervising us in a room at the DCFS office. And I remember one of the last times I saw my dad, he was just really depressed that it had gotten to that point where he couldn't see us unless the visit was supervised. And he he ended up passing away of a drug overdose while I was living in a group home. So, yeah, high school, as if it's not hard enough, I was a sophomore when this happened, um, and that was just in the midst of my soccer season, so, I was juggling a lot at the time, but, my aunt and uncle had custody of me for a majority of, my time in middle school and high school, and that was difficult to navigate in and of itself because they were extremely, hyper Christian, very conservative. They would
Jesus, you're just out of the frying pan into the fire here.
yeah, and,
So already you haven't seen your mom left after domestic abuse when you were or a domestic incident when you were 4, and you never saw her again after the police showed up.
yeah.
And then your dad loses custody of you and then dies of a drug overdose, and now you're staying with your Christian aunt and uncle. who treat you as how? I mean, I'm sure those Christian families tend to come from kindness sometimes, but I mean, did they treat you like a little bit of a freak, or I mean, how did that go?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I really think that they kind of resented me. So there was a lot that they failed to inform me when I was growing up. I remember my uncle having a conversation with me one day. He pulled me into his room and he showed me his wedding photo with my aunt. And he was like, "Do you see how she's wearing a white dress?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you know what that means?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "It means she waited until marriage." And, come to find out from my cousins that were much older than me that babysat me growing up, they got married when they were 17 because she got pregnant. And, what's insane is they had a daughter and she got married at a young age, and she got pregnant when she was 15, and this is something that they never told me. They just made it sound like their daughter had her life all together, and she found the love of her life, and that's why she had kids young. And when I had a boyfriend in high school, I wasn't allowed to hang out with him unless, like, adults were supervising, and I never understood why that was, you know? Like, I was captain of the soccer team, the volleyball team, track. I was the editor of the high school yearbook. I was in the National Honor Society. I had scholarship offers coming in left and right, and they insisted that I would get pregnant and end up living on welfare and living alone in a studio apartment. That's just something that they always told me. It's almost as if they were manifesting it, but I think that they really resented that with everything that I've gone through, I was doing far better than the 3 children that they raised. Um,
How now this is just an interesting dynamic because for me, raised by a single mom under the poverty line, and I was very into sports too, excelled at sports. And I also was very industrious. Like I had a fanzine when I was 13 years old that I printed. I wrote all the reviews, did everything like that. I started a band. I'd like, what is it that I mean that kind of saved you. You saved yourself. Like, talk to me about like, you know, those were not learned behaviors, like excelling at things. You didn't have a working model of how to be an honor student or how to be. You didn't have a working model for leadership. Did these things just come naturally? Did you learn them through sports? I mean, it's a pretty incredible it's but usually because I play kids with, if you come from a broken household or something like that, oftentimes the kid's just a mess. But like here, you're just, why
yeah.
is that?
It's I don't know, it's a different kind of hunger, and I remember, and I don't necessarily agree with this sentiment, but I remember Deion Sanders saying when he's, like, recruiting, when it comes to, like, leadership roles, like quarterbacks, he looks for, kids that come from, like, two-parent households, but when it comes to defensive players, he looks for kids that come from rough upbringing because they have a different kind of hunger, and I do think I have a different kind of hunger, but, it kind of translated into the leadership role for me, and maybe it's just, like, the resilience, I'm not entirely positive, or maybe it's just my ability to have perspective,
I
but,
think flying without a net sort of forces you to make responsible. That's how I look back. Like I made some really good decisions when I was 13 or 14, or let's say I didn't make some really bad decisions when a lot of my friends fell into IV drugs and things like that. They had a safety net though. I guess maybe you kind of realize like I can't do this. I have nowhere to land.
yeah,
I
I
have
don't
to
have
make
that luxury,
yeah.
Most people like, I had to work when I was in college, and most people, they didn't have that kind of stress, Their parents afforded them the luxury of, "Hey, we'll fund your life, we'll finance you as long as you go to school and attend your classes and pass them."
So I mean, you're living in group homes while you're like the captain of the soccer team and things like that. I mean, you're when you go home at night, you're going to. I mean, what is that? Sorry to delve so deep into this because this is just a really fascinating conversation to myself. I'm obsessed with class. I'm very class conscious, but like
Yeah.
not in the usual
So
way.
I was only in I was in a group home and I was in a foster home, and I was only in the group home for about a week's time, and I did have so like I remember my aunt and uncle had kicked me out of their house at like might have been like 2 in the morning. They were like, "Pack up your shit. We're kicking you out of here." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm still gonna make this volleyball game the next day." And it was a road game in Douglas, which is like 2 hours away from Tucson. And, I had packed up my bags, they brought me to CPS, CPS took me to this group home, um, dropped off my bags. I still managed to make it to school that day and then hop on the bus for this 2-hour road trip to an away game, and, the entire time, I'm still trying to process I'm homeless, you know? Um, but I think school and sports was my sanctuary at that point, and, yeah,
So
just
where there was no structure, you just sort of intuitively sought out structure because sports is so structured. It's
it
team
is.
oriented. It's kind of a family. I mean, so it makes a lot of sense. But I'm just really impressed at the grit and determination you showed to get to where you are now. And I can't help but feel that, I mean, this is who you are and why you do what you do. You're looking up, you know what I mean? You're out there like sticking up for the little guy.
Yeah, um I don't it's like I grew up watching my brother play sports. You know, my brother played basketball, football, baseball. He won a state championship in baseball and even played in college and professionally in Canada. And growing up, people were always in such awe at how athletic my brother was. And my dad always kind of brushed me off and was like, oh, she's just the smart one. And I remember thinking, we have the same genetics. I can play sports too. And so a lot of it stemmed from, like, having to compete with my brother, and I'm thankful that I had my brother because I think we ultimately pushed ourselves like, we pushed each other to do better, and my brother, he credits me for his, successes because he saw me get an opportunity to go to college, so then he knew he could go to college, so, um
So you guys weren't you said earlier, you said you guys your father before his demise managed to keep you guys within a 1 mile radius. Does that mean that you and your brother were actually separated at that point, maybe staying at different group homes or different foster parents, or were
Yeah,
you guys
my
always
brother
together?
my brother, never lived in a group home, so the only time me and him were separate was when I lived in a group home for about a month's time, and it was when I was living in that group home that my dad passed away, so that was especially difficult because I couldn't be with my brother to grieve, and he was a lot closer with my dad than I was, but, other than that, he was also raised by my aunt and uncle, and then, um, when I went to college is when he was alone with them.
So I thank you for being vulnerable and answering all these questions for us because for me, I mean, context is so much when I see what you're out there doing, championing, it gives me hope. But like, tell us what you do. I mean, because some people don't even understand. You're basically out there finding clips and reels and things like that, and you're from usually MAGA culture and things like that, and you're rebutting them. Explain it. How does this work? How do you find them?
Yeah, so essentially, I feel like I'm just combating the right-wing talking points that I was taught growing up. And the issue with these talking points is they're not coming from lived experiences. So you can throw statistics and data at someone all day, but without context, what does it really mean? And so you can't just take something at face value and accept that. So if you provide context, I think that really changes people's perspective. Um,
Like,
Mhm.
how do you go? I mean, how do you find this? Did this stuff just crosses your plate and you go, "I'm going to rebut that," or do you go out searching for it? Or
No, it really honestly kind of started just organically showing up on my feeds. I remember the first time it happened, I think I was, like, home alone on a Saturday night, it might have been, like, 1 in the morning, and, this video came up on my feed, and, it was this white woman, and she was like, "Did you know that black women are 20% more likely to experience domestic violence?" And so I chimed in. I was like, "Yeah, let's talk about it," you know? And then she goes on to say, "It's because they don't have respect for men." And that blew my mind. And so, you look into it, and yes, black women are 20% more likely to experience domestic violence. But why is that? It's because no one's going to look into the assault of a black woman, and a lot of it is at the hands of, like, police officers and men, and, then you have this issue of, like, not believing women, but, what we're not gonna do is victim blame people for the assault that they experience,
she's making it about the victim blaming?
yeah, to just, reduce it to, well, they only get assaulted because they have attitudes, like, that's just heinous,
Yeah. So a
um
lot of this stuff is just about being reductive.
Yes.
Yes, giving people sound bites. I mean, this is what the reel does. So when I'm watching some of these reels, I mean, it really feels like sometimes it feels like they're just paid propaganda. And I'm curious. how aware are you of what is organic and what is paid for by corporations or super PACs or PR firms, et cetera? It was revealed last year about the Russian influencers. They were paying podcasters millions of dollars to kind of push these Russian narratives. How much of what you're pushing back do you think is just bad faith acting or plain grifting, and how much of it is?
I
Can
would
you
s
tell?
I would say, I can't put a tangible number on it, but I mean, God, I would say at least 40% of it, I do think is just grifting and bad acting. Um, I can't attest to how much of it is people probably getting paid for this propaganda, but, I know a lot of people say things out of clickbait, but the concerning part is the amount of people in the comments that enable that. So when I respond, it's not necessarily to the creator for saying this thing that I don't believe that they believe, but it's the fact that there's a cult following of people who do believe in the things that they're saying.
I think that the whole MAGA phenomenon has sort of borne out this idea that, like, at the end of the day, it really isn't about their idealism as much as it is about just owning the libs, just this bitterness, like, we got it, and they have a point to some point. I mean, rural America kinda did get screwed, I mean, with trade agreements and jobs leaving, and that's not a Republican problem. I mean, that was largely Bill Clinton and, shipping the jobs out, and so they're just so bitter about it. Do you get the sense that, like, you're arguing with people often that just know you're right, but that they're just so stubbornly they just wanna own you so bad that they're not even logic just goes out the window. They're just gonna they'll die on that hill.
No, 1000%.
And so how do you combat that? I mean, you can just keep coming at them with reason and logic and
Well, that's all you can really do, you know? There's no point in getting emotional about it. You stick with the facts, and how they choose to receive that information is how they choose to receive that information. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't care about something unless it directly impacts them. So, um, you can say, hey, well, this policy affects this group of people, but if they don't witness that themselves, they don't believe you. And unfortunately, sometimes it does take it happening to them for them to care about these things or even believe you.
clearly, listening to you, like I said, like Dean Withers and you and these people that take these arguments, they give them some context, and you meticulously and logically illustrate how this is wrong.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it seems like you're winning on logic, but we're losing. I say we because I'm sympathetic to the progressive cause here. It seems that we're losing some sort of vibe war because even when we're right, they're like, "You're just so fucking smug. You liberals are so fucking smug." You know what I mean? Like you're so sarcastic and I see it. Like I mentioned Dean Withers, and like I mean, man, he's a smart kid. But then I watch him and I'm like, God, he just seems. And I don't know anything about him, but the vibe I get is just like he's some little prep school kid, super well educated, plenty of entitlements. I may be totally wrong. I didn't have that impression about you, but I knew some of your story. And I just feel like it almost does more damage at times because it's like that smart little liberal fuck. I just want to punch him in the face.
Yeah, and mind you, I typically agree with him. We're aligned politically and ideologically, but the issue is, I think part of the reason we lost an election is because, and I try to equate this to, like, people like Taylor Swift because she's so mediocre that a majority of the public is mediocre. So, with America, it seems like a majority of the public is not super well educated, and Donald Trump is the face of that. Like, he everything is dumbed down, so people understand. They think they understand, so they don't feel inferior intellectually, whereas maybe Dean's problem is his delivery makes people feel inferior intellectually.
Yeah,
So
and I think I think what you're getting at here a little bit is, and I've said this about Kamala too. It wasn't that she was a black woman. I think that was so offensive to conservatives. I think it was that she spoke like a litigator. She was so well spoken, and those people, as you're saying, like they like Donald Trump because he eats fucking cold Big Macs, and I mean, he wants to, he wants to put a nacho cheese fountain in the ballroom, and they're like they relate to him in a way because he's talking on their level. But I feel like Kamala was just so erudite, so smart, so well reasoned. I was hoping they would glom onto the law and order thing because of her, for her police background. But what, how do you feel like? Do you feel like we could have run a better candidate up there? Somebody,
Well, it was such a quick transition from Biden being in the race to not being in the race to putting Kamala in the race to where I don't really think we had a lot of time to decide who we would have liked to see, unfortunately. So I can't speak to who I would have liked to see aside from Kamala. Obviously, I think I would have liked anyone rather than Donald Trump. I think a big problem with Kamala, um, aside from not being super clear about her policies, and as we touched on, you kinda have to meet people where they're at intellectually. So if you're using terms that people don't understand, what good is that gonna do? But, I think her stance on Israel really hurt her. I think that's something that a lot of Americans are starting to wake up about and hear about right now, so it would have been nice to see her, um, not support a genocide. I think that's kind of a deal breaker for most people.
a little bit of the knock on the left, though. You know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
mean, let's be honest. I mean, I look at both sides of the political spectrum, and I favor the left, but like, I mean, it is not without it's not without its problems either. And I mean, you see misinformation on the left as well, right? I mean, do you sometimes debunk commission? And what kind of misinformation do you feel like people are getting from the left?
Tons.
Yeah, give me some examples, because yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember a couple months ago, there was a woman in Missouri who had a miscarriage and she got arrested, and everyone was in a frenzy because they thought she got arrested for having a miscarriage when in reality it's because of the way she chose to dispose of the fetus. So essentially this woman decided to discard the remains in a dumpster. It's not how you handle that situation. Well, the fear-mongering from the left does not help anyone. There are actual situations occurring that we can touch base on, and we don't need to make up scenarios to prove our point and to win people over.
Yeah, so I mean, these so many of the clips that I see you rebutting are they're just designed to package. Sometimes they package several outrages at once, or they conflate them once, like sort of the domestic abuse and race, as you mentioned in the earlier one about domestic abuse among Black women. Um, it's a format that clearly discourages nuance and favors emotion. How do you edit yourself to be effective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my followers admittedly don't have a lot of media literacy, and I can't explain the amount of times where I choose to speak on something, and then I'll have people saying like, "Hey, I was waiting for you to speak on this because I didn't really know how to interpret it." And I studied journalism at Arizona State University at the Cronkite School. It's one of the best journalism schools in the country, and one of the first things they teach you about is journalistic integrity, and integrity is very important to me. So just not spreading misinformation. I think when you deliver the truth, a lot of the way people will receive that kind of just sorts itself out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we're talking about here is media literacy, and it's really, really difficult to discern. I mean, I think of your poor generation. I think of the Zoomers. I think of Gen Up. I think of these younger generations that are just. I mean, we had three news networks, and one was like known conservative. One they always had a little bit of their slant, but there was more objective journalism. Now, hardly any of that exists, and I would say, I mean, like, look what's happening right now. Like, probably our saving grace with the Trump administration has been the Wall Street Journal. I mean, besides Wired and the stuff that's really going down, like more boots to the ground, investigative reporting, it's like the traditionally conservative paper in the Wall Street Journal is actually doing more, I feel like, than the New York Times.
Yeah.
Where do you get your, I mean, you have to filter for bias as well. So like, where do you get, where are your news sources? Send us to some news sources,
Yeah,
please.
shameless plug. I actually have a sponsorship with Ground News. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's an incredible website and app based out of Canada. and, essentially, it is a news aggregate. So they're not a publisher, but they aggregate news sources from across the spectrum, and then it shows you if this story is a blind spot from the left or the right, and it shows you, like, the percentage of reporting coming from the left or the right. So it could say, like, 80% of left-leaning outlets are covering this versus maybe X amount from the center and X amount from the right, and it'll give you, a summary and explain, well, this is what the left is choosing to touch on versus this is what the right is choosing to touch on. And I think that's just such a great tool. And it helps
Yeah, it's
you.
really interesting because, I was as you were starting to talk about it, I was gonna ask like, well, who's the arbiter of this? But as you explained, the aggregate is the arbiter. It's almost like data. Like,
Mhm.
if we know that 80% of you know what I mean, that kind of tells us the story, who's pushing what narrative. So
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting because I was wondering, like, editorially wise. So, what are some of your other news sources? I mean, among the say heritage news outlets, is there anybody you trust more than anybody else? I mean,
I mean, NPR, other than that, I try not to use, like, specific outlets only because I do think it's so important to diversify where you're getting your information from.
how do we solve this? This is one of the things I'm always trying to, I want to end the culture wars. There's so many trolls online. You try to convince somebody online, which is what you're tasked with doing, but you don't have to listen back to them. So like you kind of have the mic. You know what I mean? But like when you try to interact with people, it just people take liberties and they're ruder and they're meaner and they let out the arguments tend to be more ad hominem. But then when you meet them at the fairgrounds or something like that, the same people, I seem to be able to reason with them a little more, and they don't seem so evil. I mean, I think that the culture wars has separated us so far that, I mean, I think it's kind of like, the play Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Once things get to a certain point, the arguments become ad hominem. Or if you've ever been with a partner and you get in a terrible fight, sometimes you say shit you don't even mean, right? And then you're
Mhm.
like, God, I totally didn't mean that. I was just being mean. And I feel like that is how low the level of political discourse in this country has fallen. How do we heal that? And I'm sorry, a lot of people say don't want to heal it. I mean, I know there's a big movement right now, like, if you voted for Trump, this is your fault. And they're not wrong. They're not wrong. But what I'm saying is, unless you
But
want to
where's that gonna get us? It's
right.
like,
Now you're going to round them up and put them in camps. And like, you're just
yeah.
reversing the same power structure. So my question to you is, I mean, you do seem a little more diplomatic about it than some of the other people I've mentioned. Like, how do we do this? You're doing your part in like, demystifying misconceptions and things like that. But like, how do we make this happen? I feel like we got to get together in person a little more.
Yeah, and I think it's about having discussions, right? And so when someone is directly impacted by the policies that they voted for themselves, you have to meet them with empathy first and then say, "Okay, now what are we going to do about it?" And I think that's the first step towards moving forward, but the left has to put the purity politics away. I mean, I was nearly canceled for not being vegan. And it's like we are aligned in 99.9% of things, and you wanna cancel me because I enjoy steak, you know?
Yeah, the virtue signaling and the identity politics to a certain extent is, balance is not always symmetry. And sometimes I feel like the pendulum maybe has to swing a little too far just to self-correct. But
Mhm.
it's pretty clear that the MAGA people are not going to come around with empathy. So I feel like it behooves us to be more. I mean, I have friends that voted for Trump, and people are like, "How can you still have a friend that's voted for Trump?" And I'm like, I can feel this person coming around a little bit, you know what I mean? But I also know that this person, if somebody came to his door starving or you know what I mean? I know that in him somewhere there's some good things, and that's a hard thing for a lot of people to resolve. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but help me through this gray area here.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I think it's just the fact that I know people who used to be MAGA and no longer are. So, I mean, if I've only ever changed one person's mind, then I'm content with that impact, you know? but I think if we all, were more willing to have discussions rather than I feel like when you approach it in, like, a debate type of way, it's just about trying to figure out who's right, and I don't think that's the way to go about it.
I appreciate that yours is not that. There's a little bit of attitude there, but you know, that's part of the brand or whatever. But like I feel like we really gotta suck it up and be we're gonna have to forgive the unforgivable at some point and maybe try to get to see the good parts of people, approach this instead of looking at the bad. That there are some shared values with the right and the left. We have to get back to finding them. And I know this is a really unpopular stance right now, but it seems to me it's the only one that's gonna break the cycle.
Yeah. It would be nice to see more personal testimony out there just of people who will say, like, "Hey, when you vote for this, like, this is how it impacts me," and then, speak to the audiences and humanize yourself, I think that's what they need to see.
Some of this just comes down to common courtesy and acceptance. We don't have to agree with each other to govern ourselves. We just have to find what we agree on and govern ourselves accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times we're 2 sides of the same coin. I think the issue is that most people are not seeking out new information. They're seeking out information that further validates what they already currently believe.
Yes. So you obviously, and you know, obviously some people just like to fight too. So like, at what point do you walk away from an argument?
Oh, when it becomes circular, like, at some point, it's just cyclical and we're repeating the same things, or it just gets to a point where it's not worth discussing, There's better ways for me to spend my energy. Just once points start becoming repetitive, I just no longer want to entertain it. I mean, it's abundantly clear when someone's arguing just to argue.
Yeah, well, one of the advantages you have with your medium is that they're not talking back. You get to take the clip and they've already presented their point, but it's not an online dialogue. Have you I mean, I scoured your IG for many posts, but I've yet to see I mean, is political debate something that you're engaged in frequently? Or are you just sort of rebutting the one, you know?
Well, I mean, it's something that I talk about with my friends on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, it impacts our day-to-day living, from the cost of groceries to the cost of rent. Like there's not a segment of my life that isn't impacted by things day to day, but, I try not to make it my personality, and I try to remind myself that there is so much life to be lived outside of that spectrum, but it's hard to navigate when so many people are affected by things in this current political climate.
Do you think, as I sort of hinted at towards the beginning, that, given your difficult experience growing up, do you feel that's where that you develop this reflex to fight for people who aren't as advantaged? I mean, I guess it
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, like, not to be morbid, but I kind of can't stand when people are not pro-choice because I think, like, given my parents, they should have aborted me. They were not in a position to have kids, let alone 2, but, I think about the fact that, there are people who think that poor people shouldn't have kids, and that would be fair if they weren't pro-life. It's like, if you're not a fan of poor people having kids, which is kind of class eugenics, let's be honest, you can't turn around and then not be an advocate of their reproductive rights and choices, right? So, um, as someone who's endured a lot more than any human ever should, I that's why I'm a advocate of, abortion rights and access because I would hate to see someone go through what I've gone through if it's completely preventable.
Now there is a number of people I've noticed, like, in going through your reels, there are a few people that you, pretty much have to tackle and debunk more frequently than others. So, I mean, I'm wondering, can we out some of these people?
Emily Wilson is the bane of my existence.
Okay, so tell me about Emily Wilson.
So the first time I saw a video of Emily Wilson, I was casually just doom scrolling on TikTok, and I see this video pop up, and she said, liberals are like, I would never vote for a felon, but then they're like, here's our statue of George Floyd. And I just lost my shit because there's a difference between
They love
going
a
through
false equivocation. I mean, that
love
one
a
is just
false
like,
equivocation.
you just your head starts to spin like,
Right.
okay,
And they think
what?
it's such a gotcha moment, and the difference is no one's putting George Floyd on a pedestal, but he didn't deserve to die.
No, he's a symbol. He's symbolic.
Oh, well, she's also the one that, allegedly used to be, a pro-choice Republican, and she recently, in a debate with Dean Withers, came out and said she's changed her stance on that. She's no longer pro-choice, but she also said that, poor people shouldn't be having kids. Well, you voted to defund Planned Parenthood. You just revoked, reproductive access, birth control access from said poor people who rely on Planned Parenthood. So which is it? Should poor people not be having kids? Or are you going to force them to have kids that they can't afford to have?
And one, you've also cut all the programs that might help, social programs. You're gutting these social programs that will help those kids. It's a very interesting thing that they're so insistent on, you have to have your baby even if you're raped, but then we have no interest. They call it pro-life, but they do nothing for the life once it's there.
We're pro-birth, and I wish they'd just say that.
I wonder why this ends up being this ends up being the sort of fulcrum argument for so many Republicans. I mean, traditionally growing up for me, a lot of it was more about taxes. Republicans wanted less taxes, less big government, less regulation. We saw, Ronald Reagan help us fix that problem, didn't he? That's where it all started going downhill. But I'm just a little confused at how pro-choice became the argument that swings elections. It's still like, I mean, I don't know how anybody can look at Donald. I mean, Donald Trump has probably paid for 5 abortions in his lifetime. You just got to figure, you know what I mean? That's not a big assumption to make.
Yeah,
Um,
between that many wives and the amount of cheating that he's admitted to, undoubtedly, he's paid for several abortions.
and so, but people are willing to, just because they are so, tried to talk about this with a couple pastors, maybe like 30 episodes ago, that were pretty conservative. They were like cavalry, like, pretty on the very conservative end of the spectrum. And one of them was actually really impressive. He actually kind of came out with a really good pro-choice argument. I was impressed. I just don't understand how this continues to be sort of the election swinger in
I
in, in
don't
the
know
21st
because
century.
I would love to understand where we lost the way of separation of church and state. I think, like, one of my idols is Madeline Murray O'Hare, and she fought for the separation of church and state, in the Baltimore public school systems, and she would be rolling over in her grave if she knew what was going on with, like, Roe v. Wade and, just abortion laws that are occurring in our country right now. Um I don't like that a majority of the Republican Party vote based off of religion, and I think that it's just not fair. They don't like when we shove it in their face with, like, pride and, like, trans flags and, um, just things that the left stands for, but they vote for things because they think it reflects their religious ideologies. So are they in favor of throwing their beliefs in your face or not?
Okay, but now let's talk about some of the hypocrisy you see on the left. Let's swing back the other way, because this is fish in a barrel to a certain point. I mean, it's just the amount of hypocrisy coming out of this administration and some of these like MAGA minions is just so obvious. But I think, let's do a little bit of an inventory on the left and some of our talking points that are maybe hypocritical. Like, what would those be for you?
I don't know. I think for me, the biggest thing I'm struggling with is the amount of liberals that are also Zionists. Um, that's just something I can't get past, but aside from that, I can't think of any tangible talking points in terms of hypocrisy. For me, I really just struggle with the identity politics and the purity politics.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess a big one is the financial one that nobody ever talks about, which is the problem of passive income. Nobody ever talks about the evils of the stock market. I mean, when you think about it, we talk about our economy. Oh, the stock market's up. We're not. We must. The economy's great, but we all know that yeah, the economy is great for these inside traders and the 1% that are making money on it. But like when I look at some of the people I live around, and I touched on this earlier, and I feel they're really out there with their identity politics. They talk a really good game, but, meanwhile, they're making money on GE. They're making, you know what I mean? They're drawing their passive income. And what it does is it releases them from any accountability.
Mhm.
And that's what I think there's a problem with the left between their ideology and their accountability in a lot of ways. And much of this is financial, I think, and not ideological.
100%. I think there's a lot of Democrats that will vote in favor of Republican policy because of how it will impact them financially. I think there's a lot of Democrats who are really just diet Republicans. At the end of the day, a lot of people care about putting money in their wallets. That's why they accept money from, APAC and other PACs.
Yeah, well, and clearly we got it. It was Trump that coined the term, right? Drain the swamp, which of course is just the ultimate brutal irony. Like you've just filled the swamp like
Right. You
more than
are
it's ever been. But the fact that so many Democrats are so complicit, like I mean, there's been a few voices, like the Cory Bookers, and I mean, there's been people that are actively fighting back, but mostly I feel like they've been sort of very complicit, and I wanna know why. Is the corruption in DC just that bad? Do you think that it's on both sides of the aisle completely? And, I mean, these people have $170,000 a year salary or whatever, but they leave office and they're worth, $25 million. Clearly, something's going on. I know you're doing your part online, but, like, how do we really drain the swamp? I mean, we talk about the blue wave. I mean, do we believe that will work?
I don't think we want a blue wave. I think we want a new party. I think once we abandon the idea of a two-party system is when we'll actually get somewhere.
I mean, do you really think it's possible? Things are gonna have to it seems like you'd have to go through 3, 4, 5 election cycles to sort of build the momentum to do that just because of the way the system is made up. It's so huge that, like, it's like trying to make a corporation to make a wholesale change in a corporation. It's gonna take so long because there's so many the power structure is just so stratified and, like, who would you get behind?
I like Zohran Mamdani. I like the idea between socialism and communism, I think if more people were educated on what that would actually look like, I think that would be a lot less intimidating. I certainly started learning more about communism, and I don't know what's so disagreeable about eradicating class and everyone having a roof over their head, access to healthcare, access to education, food in their stomach. When you put it that way, it's like what is so disagreeable about that?
If you need to make more than $5 million or $10 million a year, that says to me something more about your deficit as a human being. Like if you need more, if you made $10 million a year and we just capped it at that, I don't think millionaires are the problem. You can still have a socioeconomically stratified culture if that's important to some people, but it's really, really, really the top half, the multi-billionaires trying to be trillionaires.
Mhm.
That's where the
We
real
don't
problem
need
lies.
all that money, like, it's just sitting there. Redistribute it.
Yes. Revolution, sister, revolution. Well,
Mm.
I'm so happy to have been able to talk to you today. It's a little embarrassing being an old dinosaur. I think you're by far, I'm not even going to ask you your age. That's rude, but I can safely say you're probably our youngest guest ever. And it feels really good to hear from somebody young that's hopeful, that's offering solutions, that's actually out there doing something. Um, and, just on behalf of your generation, save us. Okay. Could you
We'll
do
do our
that?
best.
She is Kim Hunt. Check her out on Instagram where she's got hundreds of thousands of followers and for good reason. Slay the GOP is her handle. see her debunk, see her use her rapier-like intelligence and logic to even out the playing field. Thanks for joining us, being our fresh face in hell today.
Appreciate you having me on.